Hi, I'm Lawrence from Brighton in England, and this is a lesson for the week 3 assignment of the Introduction to Music Production course on Coursera. And in this lesson I'm going to explain the mixer channel strip in Reason 7 and show the signal flow through it. So what I've got set up here is a single Dr. Octorex, which is playing a drum loop. This is connected up to a single mixer channel, as you can see here. So if I just hit F5 to bring up the mixer, so we've got our master section for the mixer on the right here, and then next to it is our single channel strip for that Dr. Octorex. A couple of things to note about this. First of all, this will pick up any name that you've given to the instrument in the rack, but you can also double click to rename it here. So for example, we could rename it to drum loop. You can also change the track color, so we can go for a nice orange here. The other thing is that the Reason mixer is very big. It has all these different sections. So what you can do to simplify the view is double click the headings for the sections you're not interested in, and they will then be collapsed. You can also use these buttons down here to expand and collapse the different sections as well. You have two other means for navigating. One is this scroll panel up here. We don't really need this at the moment because we only have a single mixer channel, but if you had multiple mixer channels that extended off the side of the screen, then you can easily move backwards and forwards between them with this scroll control here. This one on the side you've already seen me use. This is to scroll up and down through the different sections of the mixer. Okay, so let's start at the top with the input. The input is where the signal from our instrument comes in. We've got a simple gain control here. You just move it to the right to increase the gain on the inputs, or move it to the left to decrease the gain. You're almost certainly going to want to leave this at unity for software instruments, but it can be quite useful for trimming the input signal from external instruments or mics. Likewise, the invert button here, which simply inverts the phase of the incoming signal. You're not going to want to use that with software instruments, but you may well do for external instruments or mics where you have phase cancellation problems, and you can use that button to correct them. Now, something else to notice is that whenever I'm activating controls in one of these sections, like let's activate a few more down here, that as soon as I do that, this little orange light comes on next to the label. This is really useful because it shows me which sections are currently active, and even if those sections are collapsed, I can still see that orange light, so I know that something's going on. Now, having made those changes, I want to put everything back to the way it was. If you do get into a mess with your channel strip and you just want to reset everything, just right click and select reset or channel settings. Okay, now underneath the gain control we have this section which shows the signal path. I will explain this, but I want to come back to it after we've looked at the other sections because it will make a lot more sense then. So next we have a dynamics section, and the dynamics section has a compressor or limiter, which is this light section here, and a gate or expander, which is this dark section. I'm not going to explain in detail how these devices work in this lesson, but just know that you have that functionality there. An option you also have, if I just briefly go back to the rack and have a look at the back of the mixer channel, you can see that you have this sidechain input for the dynamic section. What that means is that you can feed another signal in there and use that to drive the compressor in the dynamic section. So let's go back to the mixer. And underneath that we have the EQ section. This is divided into two filter sections. We have a low pass and a high pass filter here, and we also have a 4-band EQ underneath that. And what's really handy about this is that you have this little Spectrum EQ window which will pop up when you activate this button. If I just start the drum loop going quickly and just switch these on, allows you to actually play around with these graphically, which is very nice. Okay, so let's switch that off. Again, EQ, something you're probably going to want to look at another lesson to really understand how that works well. But that comes next in our signal flow. Then we have our inserts. Now, to get an insert effect into the channel, we have to again go back to the rack. So let me just do that. And if I turn around to the front of the rack, if I click this button to show the insert effects for this mixer channel, you can see it's empty at the moment. What I can do is right click on that, find an effect. So let's have the pulverizer, and that effect is now wired in as an insert effect in that channel. So now when I play, you can start to hear the effect of that. Of course, the problem is that to adjust any of the controls on the effect, you always have to come back to the rack here to work. But what you can do is, if you show the programmer here, if I select pulverizer 1, we can select one of these buttons here. So let's select this rotary knob here. Let's change that to control the blend, which is the dry wet blends down here. So now that I've done that, if I go back to my mixer, in fact, let's just rename this. So we have dry stroke wet, so we know that that's what it's doing. Now, when I play that drum track, I can adjust the dry wet mix from here. And also you have a bypass button here, so we can cut that effect in and out. Let's just stop that. Okay, so that's your insert effects. You can also browse for insert patches using these controls here. The edit inserts button here will take you back to the rack, so you can make adjustments there. Then underneath that we have our send effects. You can have up to 8 send effects for each channel. Now send effects, again we need to go back to the rack. This time we don't, because it's a send effect, it's going to be shared. Let me just expand that for a moment. It goes under the master section. So if I select the master section and then I find an effect, let's have a reverb, for example. If I go behind, you can see that that has been wired in as a send effect. And now if I go back to my mixer, let's just get this drum loop going again. I can switch that effect in just by selecting this button and just control how much of the signal gets sent to it here. Now normally the send effects are post fader. So if I come down here to the fader and I take that out, you'll no longer hear that effect going. You can, if you wish, select this to change it to a pre-fader send. And now even if I adjust the channel level, you can still hear that effect going on because the signal is still being sent through ahead of the fader. Okay, so that's our send effects, and then underneath that we have our fader. So we have the level fader and we have a pan control, so we can move our signal to wherever we want it in the stereo field. This width control here, by the way, is used for stereo signals only. So if you have a stereo input, you can change the width of the stereo field, but for a mono input like this, it isn't going to make the slightest bit of difference. And then of course we have our mute button to just mute that channel. The solo button isn't going to have much of an effect here because I haven't got any other channels, but if I did, that would mute all the other channels and just leave this one playing. Okay. And then finally, down here, hidden away, we have our output section. All that does, if you open it up, is lets you choose where this channel is routed to. Most of the time you're going to want channels going to the master section, as this one does, but if you wanted to create a submix, for example,
You could also send them to an output bus. Now I did promise to explain this section back up at the top here. What this will do is allow you to change the routing through the Dynamics, EQ and Insert sections. The default routing is that Dynamics comes first, then EQ and then Inserts. But what you can do is select this button, which will move Inserts up to the top, as you can see here, and you can also swap the output of Dynamics and EQ with this button here. This other control here, Filters to Dynamics Sidechain, what that does is that it repurposes the low pass and the high pass filter here to pre-filter the signal that's being used to drive the dynamics processing. And again, I'm not going to go into detail about how you might want to use that, but understand that when you have that selected, it takes these filters out of the normal signal flow. So if you want any EQ applied to the normal signal flow when you're in this mode, you will have to use the 4-band EQ to do that. So that's the signal flow through a single channel strip in the Reason 7 mixer. I hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, and please do leave me your feedback.